Shalom. One of the first things I learned on my journey to Israel is that instead of saying greetings, hello, whatever, everybody says shalom. So shalom. And first of all, let me say what a privilege it was, what a blessing it was to be able to take this journey with Rick Santorum, with Patriot Voices, Christians United for Israel, to Israel. It was an amazing delegation. We had 4 pastors on the trip, other key leaders from across the country on this trip with Rick Santorum. It was really neat that when we landed in Tel Aviv, Israel, at the airport there, right away who met us there was Joel Rosenberg and his son Caleb. And Joel obviously was just at our leadership summit, and he talked a lot about Israel, and he really referenced Genesis 12, verse 3, about for those who bless you, I will bless, and for those who curse you, I'm going to curse. And our relationship with Israel just being so fundamental on a biblical level, but also on a strategic level in regards to what's all going on in the Middle East. So we left New York City at 7 o'clock at night. It's New York City, 7 o'clock at night. We landed about 10 and a half hours later in Tel Aviv, Israel at 12:30 in the afternoon. So somehow I lost half the day, but there we are in Israel. We board a bus. When we board a bus in Tel Aviv, we drive straight to Jerusalem. And when we get to Jerusalem, he stops on the top of the Mount of Olives. Now, call it jet lag, call it whatever you want, but leaving New York City, the Big Apple, and the first thing you see in Jerusalem is the Mount of Olives. I think everybody had to do a deep breath and just take it in. It was just a taken back, at least I was. And what really happened for me is standing on the Mount of Olives, overlooking the Temple Mount, where the temple was built. If you remember Solomon and 2 Chronicles, what we base If Sub 14 off of, right there. A little bit further down the hillside, the Garden of Gethsemane. You see the route on Palm Sunday where Jesus mounted the donkey and the parade it was all right there. And I don't know about you, but I know about me, but when I read the scriptures, I happen to believe that Judea and Samaria and Jerusalem and all that, they're so far apart. And the fact is, it's all right there. And it was a lot to take in, just a lot to take in. But it was a little bit for me like Job, where Job says, you know, God, I've heard of you, but now I see you. Now, for many of us as Christians, that's usually the transition from the head to the heart and the embrace of salvation. Well, I was already saved going to Jerusalem. I already have given my life to Christ. But for me, it was a Job moment. I've read the scriptures, I've envisioned the scriptures, I've heard the stories, I've embraced the gift of salvation, but now I see where Jesus walked, where the disciples walked, where Jesus prayed at the Garden of Gethsemane, and I try to imagine, where were the disciples during that time when they were falling asleep during that period? And then just a picturesque view. And also to see all the tombstones on the hillside and having our tour guide saying that everybody who gets buried there wants their feet facing Jerusalem. For when Christ returns, it's all about location. You want to be right there to see where it's all going to happen. Well, we got back on the bus, and quite frankly, I was just a little bit just wowed. And then we went to this place where we had lunch, and they called it basically where it was the dung gate or the dung garden, whatever it was. But that's where we had lunch. It was a beautiful terraced location now. And we had another tour guide now, and I wish everybody could experience this tour guide, who studied in the United States, but then 11 years in Israel, and just great oratory skills, great storytelling skills. But he brought us to where very few visitors have gone. And that is what they believe is now the Palace of David. At the Family Leader, we say this all the time. God designed it. Nature revealed it. and science will always back it up. God designed it, nature reveals it, and science will always back it up. And that's the next thing that really hit me. The continued archaeology studies that are revealing the truth of Scripture all the time. And so this guy's showing us where the palace of David would be. He's showing us the stones, the foundation, the cistern, where the prophet Jeremiah would have been, calling out, and the cistern that he probably got thrown into. He showed us the wall and the view of the city of Jerusalem at that point, where you could almost see David overlooking, and even Bathsheba at that point. I believe it was 2005 where the archaeologists made this discovery. And what's interesting, when they made the discovery, the visitor center for Jerusalem was over top of the palace of David. So he said, we need to move the visitor center. And so they're in the process of continuing to discover there, moving the visitor center. And then they went to a parking lot, what used to be a parking lot. Archaeologists are discovering there as well. They discovered gold coins of when the Roman Empire overtook Jerusalem. And not only that, but he was telling us of a snowstorm that Jerusalem never gets, but they got 12 inches of snow. And when they were moving the snow, one of the drivers of the machinery ran into some rock there, and he thought there shouldn't be rock there. And they started to uncover that. And it was stepping stones from the pool of Bethesda up to the mount, not only representing a physical ascension, but a spiritual ascension. So where Jesus healed the blind man, where Jesus caused the lame to walk, right there. And then when they uncovered those stepping stones, they noticed that there was a crack in each one of those stones at the very exact location on each one of the stones. And they said to themselves, it's natural for cement or stone to crack, but not each in the exact same location. So what they did is they started taking the stones off. And when they took the stones off, they found that underneath was a sewage drain. And in that sewage drain, over 2,000 Jews were hiding from the Roman Empire. And they were massacred there. And the tour guide took us for a tour up that sewage drain where the Jews hid. And we walked up there, and I'll admit this, one of my weaknesses, I'm very claustrophobic. And I had to talk myself through this that I was going to be okay, because a lot of times I'm 6'2", I had to be kneeling, the walls were caving in, I had men in front of me, I had men behind me, I couldn't look like a wimp, I had to get through this thing. But I'm glad I did, because when we got to the end and we came out, we were on the back side of the Wailing Wall, the West Wall. And as part of the wall that no one had really ever seen before until this discovery, this is the foundation of this wall. And so we took a moment, and Rick Santorum cut a videotape and was talking about the discovery there. Some of our delegation wrote out prayers and put their prayers with a piece of paper inside the wall, but all of us prayed there. And then we got back up, and Joel Rosenberg invited me to put on one of the hats, the Jewish hats, and to go to the West Wall, to the Wailing Wall, with him. And Joel and I took time just to pray. Pray for the nation of Israel, pray for our relationship with Israel, but pray for America, revival in this country, that God's people would turn our hearts individually and collectively back to Him. As cool as seeing David's palace underneath what used to be a visitor center, and to see that unearthed and to see that come into reality, and to see where maybe Jeremiah was thrown into the cistern because of his prophecy, and to see where David may have overlooked the city of Jerusalem and probably looked upon Bathsheba, as cool as all that was. Then we're going to go to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre to pay tribute to the crucifixion, to the cross, to pay tribute to the tomb, and that the tomb is empty. But one of the things that we noticed right away is that to get there, We had to walk through these narrow, almost alley-likes where there was all vendors that wanted to sell us anything in regards to, souvenirs, memorabilia that we'd want to take home, whatever it was. But typically, that alleyway, that streetway where all the vendors are, that is crowded. It's shoulder to shoulder, and you can hardly move because of all the people there. And we could walk as freely as we wanted. Because what Hamas has done with all the missile launches and the rockets going into Israel, they've basically destroyed tourism in Israel. We waited for no lines at the Mount of Olives. We waited for no lines at the Garden of Gethsemane. We waited at no lines to take a look at David's palace. We waited at no lines to get to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. And when we got to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, there's a lot of things that hit you. But one of them is when you go up to where Jesus was crucified. And they still have a rock, basically in a glass case to show where the earthquake and the crack in the rock. But I remember my pastor, Pastor Mike, who when he visited Jerusalem, when he visited the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, what he came back with is that when you pay tribute to the cross, when you pay tribute to the foot of the cross, it's a great reminder that everyone will kneel. Everyone will kneel. Because in order to pay tribute to the foot of the cross, in order to really pay tribute to the foot of the cross, everybody had to kneel. One by one, everyone had to kneel. And obviously, when you see and when you recognize what Christ has done for us, that's a moment just to take in and to see that that's where it was. That's right there where it happened, where we paid tribute to the foot of the cross. And then we walked over to where the tomb was. And walking in there and having to really, not necessarily kneel, but really had to get low in order to get inside of the tomb. And the blessing of the tomb is it's empty. It's empty. He's risen. And that's the way we left that first day. On the high note of Christ has risen. And it was just such a blessing to be able to pay tribute, such a blessing to be able to see the scriptures come alive right before my eyes. And I've been told this before, but I can tell you that it's true. Once you've been there, you don't read scripture the same anymore. When I was reading in Judges the other day and it talked about Samson going into Gaza to see Delilah, we saw Gaza. It's right there. So thank you, and I would encourage you to experience the faith journey the way I was able to experience the faith journey. I would encourage you to take more time than we had to do it, but what a blessing to be able to see it. Always having faith, always having a belief that the scriptures are true, the scriptures are real, but to see it unfold before your very eyes, it just gave you a spirit of thankfulness and of praise. It was a very, very moving day, moving experience to go from New York City and to walk through all of that and then to go out for dinner that evening. That was pretty much the biblical sites that we saw. We spent only 3 days in Israel, but it felt like 3 weeks. Rick Santorum had the comment and the belief that we did not come to Israel to sleep. We're going to see everything we can. We can learn as much as we can. And so thankful that we got a chance to experience the faith and the history of the faith and have it opened up in such a fresh way. I'd encourage anyone to go to Israel and to see this firsthand.